February 1945. Iwo Jima, Volcano Islands, 92%. That was the number that haunted every Marine flamethrower operator stepping onto the black beaches. A number whispered in troop holds. A number commanders avoided repeating. If you strapped an M2 flamethrower to your back, you didn't just carry 70 pounds of tanks and fuel. You carried the near certainty that you would not survive the day. Out of every 100 operators who advanced toward Japanese bunkers, the overwhelming majority never returned. The volcanic terrain made everything worse. Iwo's black ash behaved like sinking gravel. Every step was a struggle. Every bunker reinforced with steel shutters, concrete layers, and interlocking fields of fire. Japanese defenders knew exactly what an M2 tank looked like, and the moment they saw it, they poured all available fire into the operator. Marines needed flamethrowers. The bunkers were too deep, too hardened, too resistant for rifles or grenades. But the men carrying them were exposed and slow, their lives measured in seconds once they entered a bunker's killing arc. Into this world stepped a wiry, unassuming man from the USS Quanton, Electrician's mate First Class Joseph Kissle, a Navy Seabee with a toolbox, a sharp mechanical mind, and an idea no one in a command tent had ever taken seriously. Kissle was not a weapons engineer. He wasn't Marine Corps ordnance. He wired generators and repaired motors. But he understood what the casualty lists made obvious. The problem wasn't the flamethrower. The problem was the human being carrying it. A Marine with a tank on his back was a slow, obvious target. A Sherman tank, however, could survive everything a bunker threw at it. The solution, to Kissle, was immediate. Put the flamethrower inside the armor. Let the tank carry the fire. But the idea collided with resistance from every direction. There was no official program. Engineering sections claimed integration was impossible. Logistics warned about fuel complications. Safety officers argued that a malfunction would cook the crew alive. Kissle kept going. He scavenged valves, brackets, and igniters from scrap. He studied the Sherman's interior layout, and in secret, he began building a prototype flamethrower system to replace the tank's bow machine gun. He called it the CBH-1, Construction Battalion Hose No. 1. Marines gave it a simpler name, the Zippo. Working under tarps and inside wrecked huts, Kissle rebuilt the system again and again, machining parts by hand, reinforcing mounts, rerouting trigger circuits from spare radio components, and burning his hands more than once. When he finally installed the CBH-1 into the first test Sherman, it wasn't elegant. It wasn't officially sanctioned, but it worked. It fired a stream of flame over 150 feet, far beyond the reach of any man-portable system, and kept firing long after a human operator would have been killed. On Iwo Jima, where bunkers consumed Marines faster than commanders could replace them, Kissle's improvised weapon was about to change the odds in ways no one expected. For the moment, the Sherman sat rumbling on the beach, its crew unaware that they were inside a machine that would alter the way flamethrowers were used in the Pacific. Soon, it would become the most feared and most life-saving vehicle on the island. And thanks to Kissle, survival for flame units would rise not from 8% to 88%, but to a level portable flamethrower teams could never have achieved. A shift measured not in percentages, but in Marines who finally had a fighting chance. Joseph Kissle's idea should never have worked. That was the general verdict from the first officers and engineers who reviewed his early sketches. A flamethrower, inside a tank? Mounted through the bow gun where electrical systems, fuel lines, and ammunition already competed for space? To them, it bordered on madness. The Pacific Fleet's weapons board flipped through his blueprints with impatience. The pressure requirements alone, over 300 psi for sustained flame, violated multiple safety guidelines for armored vehicles. The Sherman's hull, they argued, wasn't designed for the heat generated by a flame system. Plumbing would require reinforced steel tubing, igniters' aircraft-grade parts, and the pressure tank's shock protection to handle rough terrain. One officer snapped the folder shut. This isn't a design, it's a hazard waiting to happen. The concerns were real. What if the tank was hit and the line ruptured? What if ignition malfunctioned inside the hull? What if fumes built up and ignited? The conclusion was always the same. Too risky, too unconventional. But Kissle didn't argue. He simply went back to work. With a few equally stubborn Seabees, He sourced whatever components he could obtain legally or quietly. High-pressure hosing from aviation stores, reinforced couplings from bulldozer hydraulics, igniter parts from grounded aircraft, flame gel tanks from Navy depots. He knew none of it was standard. He built anyway. On Saipan, behind rows of storage crates, Kissle set up a hidden workshop under camouflage netting. At night, welding arcs flickered behind the canvas. His sleeves stayed rolled up, sparks snapped along his tools, and burn marks collected across his hands. The technical hurdles were severe. Aircraft igniters overheated in confined armor space. Pressure lines kinked with turret movement. Engine vibration disrupted the gel pump. Each failure was a potential death sentence for a crew. Kissle solved problems one by one. Shock-absorbing brackets made from cut-down truck leaf springs. Reinforced pressure lines using antenna coils. Dual ignition system using surplus spark plugs and a spotlight transformer. A pacing circuit to stabilize ignition timing and prevent backflash. Every fix violated another regulation, but regulations weren't what drove him. He'd read the casualty reports. Portable flamethrower operators were suffering catastrophic losses each time they went forward. Word spread among the Seabees. Joe's building something wild, something that throws fire, something the brass won't like. Eventually, a Marine major discovered the workshop. When he saw valves hissing and igniters crackling, he demanded authorization papers. Kissle answered honestly, "No one, sir." The reprimand was immediate, but the work continued after dark. The turning point came when a young Marine lieutenant, fresh from casualty lists that wiped out most of his flamethrower section, watched a test shot rip through a sand berm. He nodded once. "If it works, it'll save my men. Keep going." That was enough. Within days, the prototype, labeled CBH-1 for Construction Battalion Hose 1, was ready. Kissle's team stripped the bow gun mount of a worn M4A3 Sherman, rerouted wiring, installed the tanks behind the assistant driver's seat, and lined vulnerable areas with char-resistant panels salvaged from crashed aircraft. When the last ignition cable clicked into place, Kissle stepped back. A tank with a flamethrower in its hull. Not elegant, not official, but functional, and far deadlier than any portable unit. Command reacted instantly. Safety officers ordered dismantling. A colonel threatened disciplinary action. Inspectors insisted the system was unauthorized and unsafe. But the CBH-1 was already bolted in, already tested, already requested by frontline Marines who knew what it meant. "Sir, my flamethrower team's last seconds out there." "Sir, we need this on Iwo. We'll take the risk." Approval never came. Kissle signed the dismantling order. He nodded through the warnings. And that night, he met the Sherman crew, sealed the hatch, primed the system, and drove the tank onto the outbound transport with the weapons still fully operational. Rules mattered, but lives mattered more. And on Iwo Jima, where ordinary flamethrower operators rarely survived long enough to finish a mission, Kissle's forbidden machine was about to change everything. Dawn on Iwo Jima came without light. The sky was a bruised gray, ash drifting sideways like dirty snow. Machine gun fire cracked from trenches no one could see. And inside the steel belly of an M4A3 Sherman, the crew of Kissle's forbidden invention, quietly nicknamed the Zippo Tank, waited for the order that would decide whether their machine was a breakthrough or a death trap. Assistant Driver Corporal Frank Delgado checked the CBH-1 system one last time. Pressure, steady. Fuel, stable. Ignition coils, humming against the hull like a swarm of insects. He exhaled sharply. "If this thing fails, they won't find much of us." Kissle, crouched beside the tank tightening a clamp, didn't look up. "It'll hold," he said. The lack of certainty hung in the air, but there was no time for more. By mid-morning, the 4th Marine Division was pinned again. Steel-shuttered pillboxes and linked lava tube bunkers were tearing entire platoons apart. Flamethrower operators carrying M2 units rarely made it more than a few steps before enemy fire ruptured their tanks. A radio call broke through the static. "Bunker cluster locking down 3rd Platoon. Need flame support. Anyone who can burn those shutters, move now." The Sherman crew exchanged a single look. Moments later, the tank lurched forward, 33 tons grinding up the volcanic slope. Kissle jogged alongside until he couldn't keep up, slapping the hull twice before dropping behind. The tank crested a ridge, and the battlefield opened beneath them. Marines in shell holes, snipers firing from slits in the rock, pillboxes forming a semicircle of overlapping fire. Enemy guns immediately converged on the tank. Machine gun tracers rattled off the glacis. Mortars burst overhead. A 47mm anti-tank round slammed the front armor with a ringing impact. Inside, the commander steadied himself. "Zippo team, stand by." Delgado flipped the ignition switch. The coils sparked. Pressure climbed. Fuel surged through the reinforced line. They closed within 60 yards of the first bunker. "Target shutter, 11 o'clock. Delgado pressed the firing stud. The Zippo tank fired its first shot in combat. A jet of flame burst from the bow mount, far longer and hotter than any man-portable unit. It hit the pillbox shutter and forced it inward, heat bending the steel until smoke poured from every seam. The bunker went silent almost instantly. Marines watching from cover froze. "What in? Hit the next one!" A second bunker opened fire. The Sherman pivoted. Delgado fired again. A wave of flame engulfed the structure, clinging to concrete, forcing fire through every opening. The roar was overwhelming, a furnace given direction. Inside the tank, sweat ran down the walls, heat building fast, but the CBH-1 held. Pressure stable, ignition steady, no backflow, no rupture. Kissle's system was doing exactly what everyone said it couldn't. The Sherman pushed deeper, absorbing machine gun fire and mortar blasts. The anti-tank gun tried a second shot. It failed to penetrate. "Cave mouth, 3 o'clock, range 80. Delgado adjusted and fired again. Flame shot deep into the tunnel, illuminating scrambling silhouettes before the fire forced them back and swallowed the darkness. Marines now advanced behind the Zippo, using its armor as a shield. A sergeant slapped the hull as he passed. "Keep moving! Don't stop!" But the Japanese defenders made one last attempt to destroy it. From a concealed pit, a soldier charged forward with a pole-mounted magnetic mine. The tank crew didn't see him, but Kissle, watching from a shattered ridge, did. He grabbed a fallen Marine's Garand and fired twice. The second shot dropped the attacker. The mine detonated on the ground in a cloud of ash. The tank continued forward, unaware that Kissle had saved them seconds earlier. Inside, Delgado steadied himself. One more bunker ahead, steel door. The commander didn't hesitate. Full output. Delgado primed the pump for maximum flow. The gauge trembled at the upper limit, dangerously close, but there was no alternative. He fired. A torrent of flame erupted with blinding intensity, the air whitening from the heat. The steel door warped, split, and finally gave way as the fire drove deep into the connected tunnels. Gunfire across the sector faltered, then stopped. Marines advanced cautiously, staring at what they were seeing. No flamethrower operators dead in the sand. No ruptured tanks, just a Sherman, intact, having neutralized in minutes positions that normally required crippling losses to clear. Across the radios came a message no one expected on Iwo Jima. Zippo Tank cleared the line. Casualties greatly reduced. Reduced, on Iwo Jima, a place where such words were almost never spoken. From his position, Kissle watched the tank roll back through the haze, flame residue dripping from its bow, steam rising from its armor. His improvised weapon had survived its trial by fire. But the bigger battle, the fight to convince the institution to accept what it had just seen, was only beginning. By the afternoon of its first combat run, the Zippo tank returned to Marine lines trailing smoke, streaked with ash, and dented from ricochets, but still running. That alone stopped men in their tracks. The crew climbed out, flushed red from heat, blinking hard as they adjusted to daylight after hours inside the steel furnace. Marines gathered around it in silence. Some studied the scorched flame projector jutting from the bow. Others touched the warm armor plates. A few simply stared, trying to reconcile what they'd just witnessed. A flamethrower system that not only survived, its crew came back with barely a scratch. A platoon sergeant broke the quiet. "Sir, that thing saved 100 Marines today. Word spread fast. At battalion headquarters, officers who once dismissed Kissle's work now demanded reports, diagrams, anything. Field maps were pulled out, casualty graphs updated. Then came the number that froze everyone. Portable flamethrower operators, catastrophic losses. Tank-based CBH-1 crews, roughly 10 to 15%. A reduction so massive it looked like a transcription error, until witnesses confirmed it again and again. By evening, battalion staff ordered a demonstration. Marines cleared a shallow ravine. Kissle, covered in grease from earlier field repairs, climbed into the bow gunner's seat. A steel drum sat 140 feet away. "Ready," the commander called. Kissle flipped the ignition toggle. The coils buzzed. Pressure surged. He pressed the trigger. Whoom! A jet of fire tore across the ravine and swallowed the drum in an orange bloom. Marines flinched, then erupted in cheers. An officer dropped his clipboard as the barrel sagged, melted, and collapsed in a puddle of glowing slag. Skepticism vanished. Before midnight, 4th Marine Division's tank commander filed an urgent request. Immediate production of CBH-1 modifications for all available Shermans, operational necessity. But paperwork moved slower than war. Safety boards demanded additional testing. Engineering sections argued about structural integrity. Procurement officers raised concerns about fuel distribution. All of it would take months. Iwo Jima would not. Kissle watched stretchers carried past. Men burned, shaken, or already gone, because the standard equipment couldn't keep up. So he made a choice. He wouldn't wait. He and a small Seabee team gathered every damaged Sherman hull they could find. Tanks with torn tracks, cracked turrets, or missing bow guns. They stripped them down, rerouted wiring, reinforced mounts, and welded through the night. Artillery thunder masked the sound of their tools. Pressure tanks turned up from Navy depots. Igniters fell off supply trucks. Spare hoses found their way into crates without paperwork. Within a week, 3 Zippo tanks rolled out. Within 2 weeks, 6. Their impact was immediate. Strong points that once required an entire infantry company collapsed in minutes. Lava tube complexes that cost dozens of lives were systematically burned out by a single tank. Casualties across the division dropped sharply as portable flamethrower teams were reassigned. Even veteran commanders, men who had fought across Tarawa, Saipan, Tinian, were stunned. Colonel Harry Liversedge, watching the aftermath of a cleared bunker field, reportedly said, "This should have existed a year ago. That tank saved an entire regiment today." But while Marines embraced the invention, official recognition lagged behind. Engineers at Pearl Harbor scrambled to draft an authorized vehicle variant. Reports circulated claiming the idea originated in stateside workshops. Others said Kissle merely refined existing designs. Men in offices argued over credit for something they had nearly shut down. But Marines told only one version of the story. They said the same name every time: Kissle. The electrician who looked at casualty charts and refused to accept them. The man who risked rank and career to build the weapon the battlefield needed. The man who put fire inside a tank so Marines wouldn't have to carry death on their backs. He never sought attention. He skipped officer demonstrations unless ordered. He avoided briefing tents. When praised, he shrugged it off. "Marines were dying," he said. "That's why I built it." But Iwo Jima wasn't done with him. Because while innovation saves lives, it also draws the enemy's attention. And the Zippo tanks, now leading every major assault, were about to discover the cost of being the most dangerous and most hunted machines on the island. By the final week of February 1945, the shape of the battle had changed. Marines advancing across Iwo Jima were no longer charging into bunker fire with 70-pound tanks on their backs. They were moving behind something new, something the Japanese had no ready answer for: a Zippo tank. A machine that projected flame farther and longer than any man-portable system, that kept moving even when small arms fire hammered its armor. A tool that turned certain death missions into survivable assaults. And behind each of those tanks, bolting fuel lines, testing igniters, checking pressure valves, was one man: Joseph Kissle, the electrician, the rule breaker, the one who refused to let statistics make the decisions. He insisted on accompanying every deployment, He claimed it was to check the systems, but the truth was simpler. He couldn't accept the idea of a failure he wasn't there to fix. On March 2nd, a 6-tank Zippo platoon led the assault on a network of caves dubbed the Dragon's Teeth. Their flame projectors cracked open fortified positions that had resisted rifles, grenades, and high-explosive shells. Kissle rode between tanks during lulls, dropping down to tighten fittings and patch scorched hosing. Every vibration, every hiss told him something. By midday, the tanks were preparing to clear the largest cave system yet, a suspected strongpoint holding dozens of defenders. The Zippos advanced. Kissle followed on foot. Inside the lead tank, Corporal Delgado fired a blast of flame that lit the tunnel like sunrise. Then an anti-tank gun, hidden in a camouflaged pit, fired at near point-blank range. The shell blew apart the right track. The Sherman lurched sideways, immobilized. The radio crackled. "We're hit! Can't move!" A second round was already being loaded. Kissle ran. Marines shouted for him to stay down. Sand jumped around his feet as bullets snapped past. Delgado yelled through the periscope, "Joe, get down!" But Kissle was already on the tank's hull. The hit had ruptured a pressure line. If the system misfired, it could ignite inside the tank. Kissle tore off a glove and clamped a wrench onto the valve housing. The heat stripped skin from his palm, but the pressure reading steadied. Inside, the driver shouted, "Pressure stabilizing!" The second AT round fired. It struck the sand under the hull, detonating in a blast that threw Kissle sideways and rocked the entire Sherman. But the tank held together, and so did the system. Staggering, half-dazed, Kissle slid off the hull as a corpsman ran to him. "You're hit! Stay down!" Kissle pushed him away. "Get the tank moving!" With pressure restored, Delgado fired. A jet of flame engulfed the anti-tank pit. The gun went silent. The Zippo platoon resumed its advance. Kissle collapsed to one knee, blood running down his wrist. A corpsman caught him as he fell. The blast had done more damage than anyone realized. He was evacuated to a field hospital near the beach. The crews he saved visited whenever they could, some bringing food, others bringing parts for him to check, as if his approval still mattered more than the surgeons. On March 7th, Joseph Kissle died from internal injuries suffered in the blast. He never left the island. Marines lined up beside their tanks in silence. Some rested their hands on the flame projectors. Others scratched his initials, JK, into the hulls. Every Zippo tank on Iwo Jima carried his mark. After the battle, High Command finally acknowledged the impact. Portable flamethrower operators, previously suffering catastrophic losses, were reassigned. Tank-mounted flame units saw casualties drop to a fraction of that number. The shift was so dramatic it forced immediate doctrinal review. Kissle's improvised system became the basis for the official M4 POA CWS H-1 flamethrower tank used later in the Pacific. The concept continued into Cold War flame vehicles and influenced modern mechanized breaching tools like the M132 in Vietnam and today's thermobaric clearing systems. Kissle did not live to see any of it. He died without rank advancement, without decoration, without formal credit. His Seabee team placed a simple marker over his temporary grave, a piece of driftwood carved with a plain truth they all knew was accurate. He saved more lives than 1,000 rifles ever could. Innovation does not always begin in laboratories or headquarters. Sometimes it begins with someone who sees a problem up close, too close, and decides to act. Kissle broke procedure. He defied orders. He did what the situation demanded. And in doing so, he changed how assault warfare was fought. Remembering him isn't sentiment. It's understanding how progress often happens. From the ground up, under fire, in the hands of people who refuse to let others die when a better way exists.